right, welcome everybody to a special edition of the Community Connection. As always, I am your host, Erik Worcester. Nathaniel Provencio couldn't be with us tonight, but we've got a great special guest as our co-host, Erik Francis, who is the author of Deconstructing Depth of Knowledge and Inquiring Minds Want to Learn from Solution Tree. We also have a special guest who's going to join us in just a bit. But our guest tonight is Dr. Douglas Reeves, the author of more than 40 books and more than 100 articles, 100 articles on leadership and education. He has twice been named to the Harvard University Distinguished Author Series and was named the Brock International Laureate for his contributions to education. His recent books include Deep Change Leadership, Achieving Equity and Excellence, From Leading to Succeeding, and Fearless Schools. Doug is the founder of Creative Leadership Solutions with a mission to improve educational opportunities for students throughout the world using creative solutions for leadership, policy, teaching, and learning. Through this, he has worked in more than 40 countries, maybe walked as well, but certainly worked in more than 40 countries. Everyone, welcome Dr. Douglas Reeves.
Thank you so much for that very generous introduction.
We are so thrilled to have you on, and now I'm going to let in our other co-host, who I think you may know, and he's going to kick us off with the first question. Special guest co-host is Dr. Larry Ainsworth, author of many books, including Integrating Teaching and Learning.
Hey, Larry, we've been friends for decades.
We have been friends for decades. You know, this is really a joy for me to introduce Doug Reeves as our featured guest. And he's been, as he knows, I've told him over and over, he's been my esteemed mentor who first brought me into educational consulting back in 1999. And Doug and I have worked together for 13 years at the Leadership and Learning Center. And I truly continue to this day owe him my undying gratitude for everything he's taught me and for all he did to launch and support my career as an education consultant and author. So everyone, it is my great honor to introduce to you Dr. Douglas B. Reeves.
Well, Larry, you're being modest and kind. What I think people also need to know is that Larry has made a profound difference. When we first met, I said, you're a wonderful third grade teacher and you can continue to do that, but you can make a difference throughout the world. And that's what he's done from the classroom. And in my other enduring memory of Larry is meeting you. You may recall this, I think at about 2:30 in the morning at the baggage claim office when we were trying to get to an engagement. And it was 2:30 in the morning and we still had an hour to drive. And I said, welcome to the glamorous world of consulting.
I totally remember that. We won't say where, but we were in the South.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was a great one. That was a really good one. I'd forgotten about that, but glad you reminded me. One thing I'd like to say to all of you is that really Doug did give me life-changing words when he said to me, you can make a big difference directly on students in your classroom or as a leader of your school, but I want you to think about the impact you can make indirectly on thousands and thousands of kids you will never meet by working with their leaders and their educators. And that's exactly what's happened. And I'm eternally grateful for that, Doug. So
thank you.
Well, Doug, listen, we're about ready to get you started, for this wonderful opportunity we have to be together. You continue to be a critically important educational researcher, prolific author, having written over 40 books, hundreds of articles, really making an enduring mark on global education. And I just thought we would all be interested in here if you gave us a little bit of a backstory of actually how you got started in your life's dedication to education.
Well, I, like probably everybody listening today and all of you, I was a teacher. I've taught at every level from primary grades through postdoctoral students. Some of my fondest memories were of at the primary grades running an elementary school newspaper club where all the teachers and parents said, no, kids won't do nonfiction. And, they only want to do fantasy and poetry. And I had more than 50 kids show up at 7 o'clock in the morning doing nonfiction hardcore journalism, and this means like second graders. I taught middle school where 2/3 of my students were new arrivals to our country, and really in difficult circumstances, as many of our students today are. And I've taught, doctoral, and I continue to. By the way, just a plug for any of our listeners who are working on their doctoral dissertations, I continue to provide support for doctoral students at finishthedissertation.org. It's a free website and it's free one-to-one coaching. And I started it because literally 69% of our doctoral candidates don't finish. So I'm still, if I'm sitting next to somebody in the airport and they say, "What do you do?" I still tell them I'm a teacher, because that's who I am at my heart.
I love it. I just had the honor this week of being on somebody's panel to complete their dissertation. So
Good for you.
but I love that. That is hard. It's hard just to push yourself to finish that last bit. You have classes, you've got guidance, finishing it up. That's the hard work.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. Yes, everybody has classes, but the guidance ends typically at the end. And our contemporaries are typically working educators, working administrators, and then they lose all their support. So my pitch is, number one, you need, have you talked to your advisor recently? And number two, let's give up the pretension. I didn't write all these books because I thought I was painting the Sistine Chapel. You give up the pretension that you're writing the world's greatest book on education. You're just laying a brick patio. So it's brick by brick, and that's what you do to get the job done.
Well,
Well,
Doug,
go ahead.
we have so many, thoughts that we wanted to ask you about today, questions, different areas and so on. But I understand you have a brand new book coming out on AI.
I
And we
do.
thought you could give us a little bit of preview, background of that book and what inspired you to write it.
Well, like everybody else, I think the honest answer is that I'm clueless. My biggest fear is that whatever you write about AI will be obsolete by the time the book comes out. But what I've tried to do is to talk about the ethical and effective use of AI. And the reason I wanted to write this book that is in the hands of the editors now is that basically more than 60%, the polls say, of teachers oppose it because they think it's a cheating machine. They really fear it, and they also fear it will take away teachers' jobs. Administrators seem to be ambivalent. It's about 50-50. But my position, having done what research I can, is two things. Number one, you're not going to lose your job to AI. Humans are more important now than ever. And part of what I attempted to do in this book is to say the human dimension is really important. And number two, to the administrators who are watching this, is to say, you've got to be a critical consumer, because every day the telephones are ringing off the hook of administrators with somebody trying to sell you a 1980s database that they're calling AI, and they're calling you saying, I can have. It kind of reminds me of what Larry and I remember in the 1990s of brain research. Oh, this is brain research. Tom Guskey used to joke, that's like saying it's pancreas research. Come on. It's just not that fancy. And what I'm worried about is that a lot of things that are called AI are either not intelligent, they're not research, and they can really mislead people. So we really need to help our colleagues, teachers and administrators alike, become critical consumers. That's the essence of that book.
Erik, you were just in Singapore, and this kind of came up.
Oh, yes, yes. There's a really strong fascination with AI there, a really strong interest in it. Um, and really they're really stressing and emphasizing it. But what I also see is that they're looking at this also as, unfortunately, another tool, and which kind of what it is. But so Dr. Reeves, how do you see AI transforming teaching and learning in the next 5 years?
Sure. Well, I'd love to hear more about your Singapore experience. I've worked a lot there, but the bottom line is there's two very different parts. One is, how can we use AI to do repetitive tasks? For example, developing lesson plans, writing some of these dumb state required plans that, everything from Title I plans to school improvement plans to building improvement plans, a lot of them are just repetitive and dull. AI can do that. But the other part is that I think we need to challenge our colleagues to do is how do you help students develop cognitively to use AI wisely? And I'll give you an example. As you know, everybody on this call are writers. We know that the hardest part of writing is not the first draft. That's easy. The hardest part of writing is editing and revision. So what I've been telling teachers is instead of fearing AI or thinking that your students are cheating, say, hey, kids, you're not fooling me. Go ahead and write it and use AI for it. But here's what you have to do. You have to submit the AI draft, and then you have to show me how did you improve, edit, and revise that draft?
That's
Because
good.
writing is not about the first draft. Good writing is about editing, revision, and improving. That's what I want our students to learn how to do. And I read a really interesting article last week that instead of teaching grammar as we have traditionally done, let's have students learn grammar by revising, editing, and improving what they see in AI. Finally, what they have to do is to fact check it. AI is full of mistakes, and frankly, it's full of racism. If one of the best studies that I reviewed was asking some of these photo images, show me a picture of professional, successful professional people, doctors, lawyers, pharmacists, and so on. Well, what do you think it does? It gives you a pretty male, pale vision. And it doesn't include women, and it doesn't include people of color. And I want our students to be critical consumers of that. Say, hey, what's wrong with this picture? So instead of fearing it, I want our kids to learn how to be critical.
Doug, is AI going to transform education?
This will probably get me into trouble with some of your audiences. But the answer is no. There was a Twitter/X exchange, how will education be different 50 years from now? And I wrote in desks in rows and columns, teachers at the front. And people, raged at me and said, well, have you been in a classroom? Yeah, as a matter of fact, desks are still in rows, teachers still at the front. So, if AI is going to transform things, it'll be, bird by bird, one teacher at a time. It's not going to be, and by the way, credit to Anne Lamott for that reference. One teacher at a time. It's not going to be based upon just buying a bunch of computer stuff. I do fear that there's way too much of kids sitting in desks listlessly and sullenly and disengaged. That's what we have to fight.
You mentioned about how AI is out with everything and everything is AI now. That's certainly a popular term. You mentioned neuroscience as having that same kind of cachet 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I was talking to David Sousa, and he said kind of that same thing that you're mentioning about how it got watered down and how everything was neuroscience, even evidence-based things and research-based things, like everything was neuroscience. Like now everything is AI. So I want to bring up a topic that is dear to me, and what I appreciate in your books is you spend a good amount of time going over research methods and talking about that. I don't see that very often in popular education books, and so I appreciate that. I'm going to take a quote from you. You said, when confronted with research claims in education, teachers and school leaders have learned to be skeptical consumers. With so many new and different initiatives that have come out just over the past 20 years, aren't they right to be skeptical?
Absolutely. I wish they would be more skeptical. I've seen way too many school systems that ask somebody to come into a dark auditorium with breathless enthusiasm, sometimes without any research evidence at all, but talking about the new thing and the new thing. And let's take an example. I don't want to be generic about this. All the rage now is the science of reading. Well, let me tell you. So the science of reading is all about phonics. I happen to have one of my prized possessions as a first edition of McGuffey's Readers, 1836. And if you look at 1836 McGuffey's Readers, It's full of phonics. It's full of poetry. It's full of exactly what people would say, oh, here's the hot new 21st century deal. So come on, give me a break. Any great teacher knows that, of course, we want students to love reading. We want the flashlight under the bed, but we also want them to be able to decode words. That is not new. And frankly, I resent some of the publishers who are acting as if science of reading is something that they discovered in the last few years. It's just not true. And the same is true of many of our very best motivational and behavioral techniques. I think we should be more modest in our claims when we think that we invented something.
You talk a lot about education being multivariate, which absolutely it is. There are so many things that go into getting it right. How does the average, when I'm going through your books, I mentioned this before, that I was a former principal. There are some things that I wish I had known. That's on me. I wish I had known some of those things more when I was leading a school, but I didn't feel like those things were being pushed by our division. How would principals or teachers know what sources to look at for ways that are more likely to actually improve their teaching?
That's a really important insight. Go to the head of the class, by the way, because multivariate analysis is the bomb. Too often, what happens when you see what's called accountability in our country for the last several decades is just either test scores on the right-hand column and then socioeconomic status and on the left-hand column. And we assume that X causes Y. But the truth is, there's a lot left out in that equation. What you want to do, as Larry has done, is to talk about teaching and leadership practices. So my argument is, when I say multivariate, I don't mean 100 variables, but I do mean more than two.
Yep.
You gotta say, hey, what did you notice about teaching and leadership practices? What did you notice about depth of inquiry by the teacher? What did you notice about interaction, checks for understanding, and so on? What did you notice about the leadership practice? How often was the leader in classrooms not as the British inspector, but how often was the leadership there to simply offer coaching and observation and direct feedback? So I think the missing variable is not just socioeconomic status on one side and test scores on the other side, but what did the teachers and leaders do that brought those two variables together? By the way, I don't want to overcomplicate this. And Michael Fullen, my good friend from whom I heard just the other day, wrote the introduction to a book. And he said, I think if I can remember his quote exactly, it was something like the number of initiatives that a school has is inversely proportionate to student achievement. So what I learned is, hey, it's got to be more than two, but it's not a whole lot more than six.
Yep.
More than six variables are all that you need.
I think with that research that's often done and it can bring about change, Erik Francis, and I appreciate that he mentioned the depth of knowledge and depth of inquiry. That's your thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate
Ask
this question about change, because boy, when we come into schools, we're supposed to be the change makers, or we're put in a position to be the change makers, and often not, it's not us. So it's basically the leaders who need to do it. So, change can be one of the most important but most challenging things for an institution to go through. And Dr. Reeves, one of the suggestions you provided is that leaders must identify what they can stop doing before asking their colleagues to take on a new change, and said that we must pull the weeds before planting flowers. I love that analogy. So this may be this could be a very interesting question. Has it become any easier or simpler to pull the weeds? And have the weeds changed over the time? Are we still being plagued by the same weeds that have plagued us? Gosh, probably let's even just cement it down, let's narrow it down since the 1980s and 1990s, when we did become more of an outcomes-based or a standards-based learning system.
Erik, that is such a thoughtful point, and I appreciate you raising it, because it's easy to hang more ornaments on the Christmas tree. It's a lot harder to say, what are we going to stop doing? And again, I want to try to be specific. I know some wonderful principals who have basically, I'll go, Miss Campson is the name of the person I'm thinking of, and I said, Miss Campson, how is it that you the same schedule, the same money, the same per pupil allocation that everybody else does, and yet you have, collaborative assessments. You follow Larry Ainsworth. You have common formative assessments. You have all these things. Why do you have time? And she looked at me and she said, "Because I haven't had a staff meeting for 3 years."
Mm.
And that's how you pull the weeds. Ms. Campson says, "I'm going to, ladies and gentlemen, here are the announcements, read them at your leisure." Bam. Saved 44 minutes and 50 seconds of every staff meeting I've ever been in. And what Ms. Campson does is say, now we're going to spend time on getting the real work done. And she allocates every staff meeting to getting real work done. So, you don't do it with more time, more money. I don't care if you get $1 billion grant, you're not going to get a 25-hour day. You make better use of the time that you've got, because we know how to do it. But the complaint that teachers have is we don't have the time. Well, darn it, let's use the time that we have, not ask for extra time or ask people to work on Friday afternoons or Saturdays.
Erik, if I can, I was really glad you brought that up. Doug, you'll probably remember, I remember really vividly that one of the things about the Weed the Garden was you used to say, what can we stop doing without harming student learning? And I just think that, that just ties right into it. It's about teachers saying, well, what do we take? Everything's important. But, what can we stop doing that we really don't need to be doing because it's not helping student learning?
Well, and let me challenge the administrators who are viewing this, because a lot of them, don't get into classrooms or don't revise their staff meetings. Oh, what is the superintendent calls? I can't tell you how many hundreds, thousands of meetings I've been in, and I'll turn to the superintendent and I'll say, "Ma'am, do you really expect a 30-second response from the principals in this room?" And not once, not ever have they said, "Of course, if the building is burning down, they'll call you." But otherwise, they need to get the heck out of their desk and go into the classrooms and be an instructional leader. So we need to really empower our administrators to stop answering emails every 30 seconds and get out there. I'm indebted. I always try to give credit to other researchers here. I'm indebted to Cal Newport, who's a computer scientist at Georgetown, who talks about every time we switch tasks, go back and forth, we're losing 20 minutes.
Yep.
That's why what ought to be a 30-minute task takes 3.5 hours. So get out from under the desk, be with teachers, be with kids. If the building's burning down, they'll call you.
That ties in, I think, to a lot of the work that Jonathan Haidt's done with the age of
Yes.
anxiety and trying to get cell phones out. That certainly has made a huge impact. I think it will make a huge impact going forward, just from what you're talking about. Just losing your focus from having some rich task you're doing, suddenly your notification goes off, you're off of that, you've totally forgotten, back to your phone. So I appreciate, when I began as a principal, we wanted phones. That was what our district wanted, phones everywhere. Let them look things up, let them have that. And it's been a huge shift, and I think that will lead to incredibly positive dividends.
Well, and for our viewers, let's be clear on the reference. Jonathan Haidt, Haidt, he's at New York University. And I think he did a brilliant job in that. And the title of the book is The Age of Anxiety.
Yep.
But one of the things that his book has done is to take the cell phones out of the hands of students. He needs to go the next step and take the cell phones out of the hand of administrators and teachers. And by the way, John is a prince among men. When I've written to him about some particular parts of his book, he doesn't reply in 30 seconds like too many people do, but he does reply in 24 hours. And he's a really thoughtful scholar and a really great guy, and I really respect his work.
Let's take it one step forward. I think people are now calling for computers to now have less of a role in schools. Thoughts on that?
Well, look, it's a tool. It's like a screwdriver in the 1920s. It's like a calculator in the 1970s. It's not going to ruin education. It's just a tool. And part of what I want students to be able to do is to be, appropriately contemptuous of the tool. Screwdriver can't do everything rather. The calculator can't do everything. The computer can't do everything. Rather, what I want our students to do is to learn how to be critical consumers. Whether it's the internet or whether it's the computer itself, it's just a tool. And I want them to know how to use it, because that's part of being an adult in the 21st century, but not be subordinate to it.
Yep.
Exactly.
So we've talked about change and research. Larry, you're going to bring up professional learning and how that can lead to change. Larry, what you got for us?
Well, I'm saying we have here with us, the champion exemplar of the importance of professional learning. And, this was something that Doug ignited in me 25 years ago to really make sure that every professional learning engagement that we did really was of value to people, that was practical, research-based, down to earth, and usable. And I had so many experiences, where teachers would say, I really didn't want to come to this. I had to be out of my classroom.
Right.
This was actually really good. But Doug, you've always emphasized professional learning, and maybe you can just share with the listeners and viewers here, what is it that really makes a professional development or professional learning session truly impactful, not only for educators, but for leaders? And what role do educational leaders play in that effectiveness of professional learning?
Well, I think the older I get, a dose of modesty comes with that. If I could answer Larry's question in one phrase, it would be listen more, talk less. So, for example, as Larry has probably seen me do, I start professional learning not with here's my agenda and here's how I'm smarter than you and here's how I can tell you what to do, but rather today will be a success if ... And I listen to people. And I think we need to do much more of that listening. And to the leaders watching this, when you're conducting another staff meeting, I'm pleading with you, listen more, talk less, because the colleagues in the room have got something to say if only we will listen to them. Similarly, I think a lot of professional learning, as you've suggested earlier on this discussion, needs to be based on evidence. I always try to start as, hey, for example, I'm a researcher and I've tried to be a pretty good one, but one of the things that I always do is here's what I thought was true 10 years ago, and now I know is not true. Howard Gardner, by the way, another Prince among men, that's what he does at Project Zero at Harvard. Howard will also say, hey, what do you think was true today that you thought was not true 10 years ago? And all I'm thinking is, if Howard Gardner and sadly the late Dick Elmore and people like that are willing to say, I used to think this, but now I think this. If they're willing to admit they were wrong, then the rest of us ought to be willing to admit that we were wrong as well. And I do my best to model that.
What do you think is the outdated belief? What's one outdated belief about teacher evaluation? I know you've already pretty much talked about this, but what's one outdated belief about teacher evaluation that
Oh my
we
goodness.
need to abandon?
It is so great that you mentioned that, because literally 30 minutes ago, I got an email from Rick Stiggins, who has been the champion of critiquing, saying why contemporary teacher evaluation is worthless. And I wrote to Rick because I said, I just quoted you in a book and I wanted you to know that and tell you how much I appreciate your work. And he emailed back. So here's the problem. What is missing in teacher evaluation, and this is, I would also argue, is true in administrator evaluation that I've written a good deal about, is the disconnection between cause and effect. For example, what you see in too many states that sometimes by legislative mandate are clinging to this 1990s notion of test scores predict what teachers are doing, and it's just not true. And that's because, and I'm sorry for the little lecture here, but let me just go on a little disquisition.
That's why you're here, pal.
If you step on the scale one day and it says 150, and the next day it says 250, and the next day is 200, nobody's going to say, my word, what a remarkably great diet you must have. You're going to say, wait a minute, that scale is broken. That is exactly what happens in value-added teacher today. Today's teacher is an A, tomorrow's is a C, the next day's is an F, and then it's back to an A. It's a broken scale. And what Rick Stiggins has done, and I really want to give credit to him about this, is to call him out on that. And I've, in my own small way, have attempted to do the same thing. And I've heard the so-called teacher assessment experts to say, well, Doug, that's really complicated statistics. I'll say, just give me a chance. Perhaps I could try to figure it out. I just deeply resent the overcomplication of this because nobody trusts it. A better evaluation system, and let me turn this from a negative to a positive, is what Kim Marshall does. By the way, Kim Marshall's new book, third edition, Rethinking Teacher Evaluation and Supervision, is brilliant. And you don't have to buy the book. All you have to do is go to his website, marshallmemo.com. And the way that Kim does teacher observation and evaluations is fair and consistent. And that's the right way to do it. You don't have to have these complicated statistics.
Thank you.
So
We're gonna
no more mini lectures, I promise.
No, are you kidding me? This is like basically learning from the learning tree. Are you kidding? This is amazing hearing both you and Larry talking about this. And I'm sorry if I'm fanboying because as Larry know from talk, you guys basically inspired and influenced a lot of my work. And many others. And we're going to shift a little bit from talking about teacher growth to student success. And it's interesting we talked about the Jonathan Haidt book because I just want to make sure I pulled it up to that I said this and how he says in there how raising test scores quickly became a national obsession as a new reform efforts penalized or rewarded schools based on test performance. So there's all this emphasis about students' performance. And also what I also found was fascinating is I read something where they said the first time we actually talked about achievement gaps is when we moved towards a standards-based system, like gaps in learning. That pressure for performance has also required schools and made schools feel like they have to do these professional developments of one and done, and you're expected to go in there and give them a bunch of active learning strategies. So what do you think? How can schools close the achievement gaps without relying on these ineffective, quote, silver bullet, one and done? Here's a bunch of activities, a bunch of worksheets you can fill out to plan and provide your instruction. What do you think about how schools can close achievement gaps without relying on those ineffective one and done or silver bullet solutions?
Well, it's really interesting to hear you say that. My own organization, Creative Leadership Solutions, has changed dramatically. We will not do one and dones. We will not do drive-by. In fact, we don't even do workshops. We have changed remarkably from workshops to coaching. I'd rather have my colleagues spend a day with a team of teachers, a day with a team of administrators, really getting work done, and then have a relationship that builds trust over the course of a year, not a one and done. I know that's still popular. I know a lot of superintendents love it, but we just stopped doing it. The other thing is that I think you have to define what success means. Look, I'm a realist. Test scores are here. Test scores are always going to be there, but it can't be the only thing. In the writing that I've done on accountability, along with to credit where credit is due, the late Rick and Becky DeFore, what we tried to talk about was let's change accountability to not exclude. It's a futile argument to say tests are bad. Tests are going to be here, but what we can do is say, hey, you know what? Tests are here. That's 10%. Can we also talk about the other 90% of what we do in terms of teaching and leadership, parent engagement, community engagement? So I'm trying to take the more moderate, middle of the road, comprehensive view to say, let's have accountability include all these things, not just scores.
Well, the other thing is really interesting is that it seems like people wanted to give it to me quick. What I used to say was 10 TV minute has become more of an AI millisecond. Um, and what people want, they want simple solutions. Well, I'm gonna ask you this. What do you think? Do you think there's any simple solutions for improving student outcomes? Or is this just, people just have to understand that it's complex, but complexity can become easier with time and effort investment?
Well, it's interesting. I was just writing about this today. Look, Einstein said things should be as simple as possible, but not more so. So I'm okay but the example that I want you to consider is grading. One of the things that fundamentally undermines student motivation, behavior, and attendance. If I could just do one thing in grading, it would be to stop using the average, because the nation is consumed by these dumb electronic grading systems that automatically use the average. They punish students at the end of the marking period for the mistakes that they made 3 months ago. And if all I could do is one thing, stop using the average, we would have a dramatic reduction in the failure rate in this country, as well as an improvement in behavior and attendance and student achievement. Same goes for reading. You know, you can have a 50-point reading plan, but if I could just do one thing, it would be to have more nonfiction writing, because nonfiction writing in every subject, not just in ELA, but in science, math, social studies, PE, music, art, you name it, when everybody does nonfiction writing, you have an improvement in literacy. I think we are plagued in education by having people who will take simple things and turn them into very complicated ideas, because that'll make the 5-year plan work. When I think what people of, my generation needs to do is to take complicated things and turn them into simple things. Here's one thing that I want to ask you to do.
Speaking of complicated things, you mentioned that studies have stated that educators don't have time to teach the vast number of standards they are required to cover. One of our previous guests, a guy named Larry Ainsworth, talked about this with us and discussed his work on power standards. Is there anything else that can be done to make a curriculum that allows more depth and less breadth?
Well, first of all, credit to Bob Marzano, who did the pioneering work on this, saying it would take California, for example, 3 years to cover 1 year of their curriculum. It's just absurd, because nobody ever comes to the state capitol and saying, here's what you don't have to do.
Right.
They're always piling more and more stuff. So the answer, I think, is really at the district level. And that's where somebody has to have the guts to say, here's what you don't have to do. And you've got a lot of contemporary examples here. Here we have the project. Everybody wants to teach that. Well, what are you going to stop teaching in social studies? And the social studies teachers get the worst of it. And nobody says, well, you don't have to do the War of 1812, or you don't have to do the Civil War. They always just add more thing. And then from the teacher's point of view, all they hear is cover, cover, cover. So I think the answer, as Larry has said very articulately, is power standards. It's saying what are the underlying fundamental things that students need to learn. And if I could offer, I don't want to be philosophical about this. Here's the homework assignment I want to ask for our viewers to see. If you're teaching 5th grade, go teach a 6th grade teacher to lunch and say, what do I need to do to have my kids go to you next year? If you're teaching 8th grade, go to take a 9th grade teacher to lunch. And here's what you will hear. They will solve the standards paradox. They will never say, cover every standard, for goodness sake. Forget about Larry, forget about Doug, cover every standard. What they will say is a couple of things. Number one, here's what's most important, 5 or 6 things to enter my class with confidence and success. And then they'll say, here's what's not on the state standards. You want to know what's not on the state standards? Organize an assignment notebook, ask for help before it's a crisis, take a project and break it down into component parts. In other words, the standards paradox is there are too many. Everybody knows that.
Yep.
There's also not enough. There's not enough standards on some of those fundamental operational things that all of our students need to do.
I want to just, if I may, just make sure to let your viewers know that the gentleman that is your guest here today is the originator of Power Standards. And he was generous enough back in 1999 to say, hey, Larry, you take this and run with it. And that first book, Power Standards, which Doug wrote the foreword to, that continues to be, and was through all the COVID years, still the #1 most requested workshop, process, method that I still am asked about because it makes such sense. But I never want, his generosity to be overlooked for the fact that Doug was really the one that came up with this. And Doug, you know that the what the solution tree, I believe, calls the real criteria, REA, readiness, endurance, leverage. Those are all Doug's. I added finally the assessment piece, the A, because we were realizing that teachers would just gravitate to what's on the test, as one of their criterion for selecting the power standards, the priority standards. But anyway, that's been a phenomenal contribution, Doug. And I just want you to know that it goes on to this very day. I'm still being asked, we need to get some work done with essential standards, priority standards, power standards. We haven't revisited them in years. So I won't go off anymore, but I just want to make sure I
That's very kind of you. Thank you.
Doug, I believe you taught me this. He said, what's essential for the student learning, for students learning? Not about what you like, not about what you have materials for, resources for, time for, whatever. What do the students need to be successful? That always caused a quietness to fall over the group. And then people got away from their own personalized viewpoints about what it should be to make it about what it really does need to be.
Well, precisely. And that's why I really encourage intergrade dialogue. It's way too rare, particularly at the 8-9 level where ninth
Absolutely.
graders, everybody complains ninth graders are not prepared, they're clueless. And, and they leap to blame eighth grade teachers. And I've been an eighth grade teacher, and I would give anything to be able to have that kind of dialogue with my colleagues so I can, I want to do the right thing. Every eighth grade teacher watching this wants to do the right thing, but sometimes we don't have the opportunity to really dialogue with our colleagues at other grade levels.
That's why it's also critical that leadership recognizes the value of that cross grade level collaboration. Absolutely critical for them to make that a priority so that it does happen.
So I was fortunate to be the principal of a K-8 school where most of our kids went to the same high school, which happened to be just a walkway away from the school. And that was one of, I think, a very impactful practice that we did. I had my 8th grade team meet with the 9th grade team. So
Right.
small school, so that principal and I, Dr. Mines, and I had a chance we'd meet and our teams would meet. And we did that a couple of times during my tenure. And I do think that was really powerful and ask that question. What can we do best K-8 to prepare our students for what you see the needs are in high school? So I appreciate that you affirm the practice. I echo that. I wish more places would do that. Doug, you mentioned something earlier I want us to come back to, and then I'm going to ask about fearless. So this is for everybody. I'm going to give you a sentence frame here, which is what's one thing I used to believe but no longer do? I want everyone to answer that question, but not now. I'll give you some time to think about it. We're going to come back to it before we leave. But what is one thing I used to believe but no longer do? So we're going to jump into Fearless, your most recent book that has been out. You're talking about the importance of psychological safety and student safety. What are some practical steps that educators can take to establish an environment conducive to learning to make those fearless classrooms?
Well, first of all, as I always try to do, I want to honor the research of other people. Amy Edmondson is a professor at Harvard Business School. And what Dr. Edmondson did was to study hospitals for the last 30 years. And she asked this provocative question, Doug, what hospital do you want to go to that has the high error rate or the low error rate? And I said, well, shoot, Dr. Edmondson, I want to go to that low error rate hospital. Wrong, she said. She said they both had the same error rates. The low error rate hospital just shoved their mistakes under the rug so that nobody ever learned from them. So a high error rate hospital is what she called a fearless organization. And she extended her research not only from hospitals, but also to airlines and many other scenarios. And so I tried to take Dr. Edmondson's research and apply it to schools. So finally, to answer your question, what does a fearless school look like? For one thing, mistakes are never a source of shame and embarrassment. When a kid offers an answer that is a mistake, you don't turn away and say, wrong kid, which means they will never volunteer again.
Yep.
They say, tell me more about that. How can I learn about how you arrived at that conclusion? Similarly, in a staff meeting, when a colleague offers a suggestion that may not be contrary to your understanding of research, you don't say, "You're wrong. I know the research better than you do. Please tell me more about that." So a fearless school is a place where it's safe to make a mistake, safe to offer a different opinion, and we all learn from that. And Larry and I both know Dr. Mike Wasta, former superintendent, special education teacher. And what Dr. Wasta did was to send out what he called oops grants.
Oh,
And
that's right.
what Mike would do was to say, "Hey, here's my 3 biggest bloopers of the last month. Here's how we can all learn from them." And when the superintendent is willing to admit mistakes and say, "Here's how we can all learn from them," then that sets the tone for the whole school. Similarly, I'll bet we've all seen teachers who very cleverly will make deliberate mistakes on the board, knowing that a student will catch them. Students
Yep.
love catching the adults in mistakes. And that's what
true.
you want to do. A fearless school is where it's a safe place to make a mistake and everybody learns from it. And by the way, for whatever it's worth, I try to do the same thing in my presentations. I'll talk about, "Oh, gee, here's a dumb thing that I wrote 10 years ago. Here's how I've learned about change leadership. Here's what I've learned, and here's how things have changed." And I'll just tell you this to your viewers and colleagues. If you ask people, as Professor Gardner does, "What do you know today that is different from what you knew 10 years ago?" And they can't tell you, that tells you that you do not have a learner on your team. And you better be thinking about, number one, how it's okay to make a mistake and admit learning. And number two, why it is that they haven't read anything in the last 10 years.
When we spoke last time, you mentioned a practice schools could do to foster and encourage belonging. And it struck me because I hadn't thought about it. It seemed pretty simple. Do you recall what that thing was?
I'm not sure the context. Go ahead and tell me.
You said get every student involved in an after-school activity.
Oh my goodness, yes. This was a great study. I wish I would read my own research sometimes. But this was really a good one. It had to do with student involvement in extracurricular activities. And I'll just give you without a lecture, the data and then an anecdote. The data is when students go from 0 to 1 to 2 activities. And I don't care if it's the football team or the drama club or the chorus, it doesn't make any difference. When they go from 0 to 1 to 2, their GPA goes from the D level to the B minus level, attendance better, behavior better. And it's not, I love the coaches and so on, but it's also because they have a positive peer group. "Hey, you missed practice yesterday. We needed you." And that positive peer group is what happens in those extracurricular activities. The citation from Ed Leadership is called the extracurricular advantage. But anecdotally, it's when I do school visits, I've seen students who literally had their head in the desk in one wing of the school, and then you go down to, maybe it's the chorus, maybe it's music, maybe it's medical care technology, and they're all vibrant. They're all on their feet. They're all engaged. It's the same kids in the same school with the same demographics. So the difference obviously is not in the kids. The difference is in the level of engagement. And what those teachers made me think of, why can't I have my math class as engaging as a music class? And I've tried to pay better attention to what those music teachers and those health education teachers are doing that I need to do a better job of.
Love it. Just seems so simple. And again, it's something I hadn't thought about until we talked about it last time. We have about 10 minutes left. We will get to that prompt, but I want to close out last section on future of education. And Erik and Larry, I know we got questions there. Think if you want to ask something else. I'm going to ask Doug this. Doug, who are you following now? So who are those bright voices, besides people on the screen, obviously, who are leading us forward in education?
Well, certainly John Hattie, a longtime friend and a prolific author, continues to be a shining light. And I've sat next to John. Well, you mentioned you were in Singapore. I was actually in Singapore the last time I saw John, And I won't quote him precisely for obvious reasons, but he was listening to a speaker and he leaned over to me and he said, "What PS?" in certain terms, because John is the prototypical consumer of research that's both bad and good, and I definitely admire and respect him. But I will also tell you that I'm watching young researchers on the horizon. Just this weekend, I read new research from Johns Hopkins University. By the way, if you're not subscribing to the Johns Hopkins University research, I strongly recommend it. They every week they put out things, and I think I do my best to keep up with research, but I'm always learning from them, and I really appreciate what Johns Hopkins has done. And it's not just one person, it's the whole group of them. So that's a one end of the spectrum from the other of literally graduate students from people of John's and John Hattie is mine generation to the other. So I don't know. I'm doing my best to keep up.
Got it. Thank you. Erik, you're up, and then Larry.
Gosh, who am I reading and looking at these days, or what I think?
No, any question for Douglas for future event?
Oh. Well, I think, like, what is one big change you see coming in education, Doug, in the next 10 years that schools need to prepare for now?
Well, I think I say at some risk perhaps that we have continued to underestimate the impact of COVID. We still have, here we are several years into COVID, and yet we still have students who are profoundly impacted both behaviorally and academically as a result of COVID. So I hope what we will see is finally a recognition that means we need to give these kids the support that they need. And the evidence is clear. Again, credit to Johns Hopkins. Summer school is not working. After school is not working. The kids who most need it don't show up. So what I hope we will see in the future is more in-school intervention and support for children who need it most. Alas, I think we need to be realistic. Funding for schools is being cut, and I think what happened also during COVID, one of the negative impacts, is that we increased fixed cost without increasing revenues. More than 1 million students have not come back to school who left school in 2020. What that's going to mean is fewer per pupil funding, and it's going to mean larger class sizes. So we're going to have to figure out how to, and if we do that, we're going to burn teachers out and have a greater attrition from our profession. So the greatest challenge that I see in the years ahead, to finally answer your question, is how do we attract and retain great teachers in a time of financial and physical stress?
Great question. Do you have another hour for that one? Larry, any question you want to close?
Actually, thank you, Erik. But actually, Doug, that was going to be my question now is what kind of positive message can we send to education during the times of federal legislation with regards to all of the cutting? I saw an article, I subscribed to the NEA weekly update, and I saw a statistic that I was not surprised by, but really saddened by, that there are currently almost 407,000 current teacher vacancies across the US. How do we get our educators, which is what Doug was just talking about? But I know that we feel like our job is to keep bringing the light, the optimism wherever we can when people are fearful of their jobs, the impact of the cuts and so on. And I just would love to hear what Doug had to kind of say a little further on.
It's not as bad as all that, Larry. It's worse.
Here's great. Thanks, Doug.
And here's why. A wonderful study, again, credit to Johns Hopkins, is on average, in poor schools it's worse. Students will have a full year of a non-certified teacher in their grade. So they're going to get judged on Algebra 2, without ever having an Algebra 1 teacher who could teach them. They'll get judged on grade 4 without ever having a grade 3 whose teacher was able to prepare them. So I just think we need to be honest about the fact that it is a national crisis. Now, here's the positive thing. The positive thing is that when there's no money out there, what is there? And I wrote an article about this called Restoring the Teacher Pipeline in the Profession. When you interview teachers, what are they asking for? Yeah, money's important. None of our viewers better leave this call saying Doug thought money wasn't not important.
Right.
Money's important. Can't have 6-figure debt and a 5-figure income, which is what we
Yep.
ask teachers to do. But you want to know what? We learned in COVID, money's not enough. They want respect. They want safety. They want collaboration. They want learning. We have to stop thinking that money's going to solve all of our problems. And so to the administrators watching this, I want to ask you, what have you done in the last week to convey in a very personal way respect for teachers? Because that's what they're asking for. And if you don't provide that, they're not going to be there next year. So I don't mean to place all these burdens on administrators alone, but I think we made a grave mistake to think that bonuses and money and salary alone are going to solve this. It won't. They want respect and safety and collaboration. And colleagues, leaders, that's your job.
Doug, agree 100%. Hey, Doug,
Thank
where
you,
can
guys.
our listeners find you?
At creativeleadership.net.
Great.
And by the way,
We-
I get credit for stuff I don't do. As Larry said, I have 75 colleagues who do all this work. So creativeleadership.net is a bunch of other people, certainly not just me. I'm just one of the team. And I stepped down as CEO a year ago. Our president, Lisa Almeida, is really the leader. So I'm just one of the team.
Thanks for giving that credit. That's very kind. Doug, Fearless Classrooms just came out. A book on AI is coming up. What else would you consider a seminal work for our viewers or listeners?
Well, Larry mentioned a couple of books. So if I could, give a couple of shameless plugs.
Please do.
I would say Deep Change Leadership is one. And the other that I want to give credit to Bob Aker for, EAKER, that Larry mentioned earlier. Bob and I wrote 100-Day Leader. And 100-Day Leader has what Larry said is the not to-do list. Don't write your next plan, piling one plan on top of the other. What 100-Day Leader does is to say you have to have a not to-do list before your next list and write a 2-page plan, not a 100-page plan.
Love it. Thank you. We have a STEM. I said we come back to it. So I'll go first, give you a little more time. It was, what's one thing I used to believe but no longer do? And to be honest, I said I was principal. I don't think I believed enough that I should be deep in the research like I should have been. I wish that I had pushed my staff a little bit more and myself a little bit more to be up on more of what research is out there and what research is saying. I don't think I did that great. So that's something that I would certainly change. I just didn't see it. I didn't see the one-to-one correlation, and I should have. So that is my confession. Who wants to confess next?
Gosh, I'm going to go with a quote from, I'll paraphrase it. It's actually from Batman Begins. I know that's very, rudimentary, but I like when he says, it's not who I am, but what I do that defines me. And what I used to think, in this realm of what we do as authors and presenters, it was about a lot of times us. And I see a lot of that. I see a lot of people, basking in the spotlight, branding themselves. But lately I've been really trying to focus on the philosophy of my father, who I talk about a lot. He was an advocate for in the civil rights movement for disabled, and he did a lot of great things, but a lot of people don't know that, but he did. And he would look and say, you see that over there? I did that. And I'd say, Dad, why don't you make that more, apparent, open? He goes, Wasn't matter. It happened. It's happening. It still continues to happen. And I think that's kind of what I'm even like, really focusing on is not who I am as the author or whatever. And Doug and Larry, we could probably say about this, and because we see this a lot out there where it's like about the individual, not the work that they're doing. And now really trying to focus on, well, how can I serve? How can I help and support? Kind of the quote, Jerry Maguire, help me help you. And that's something that really I've really tried to focus on and really focus is that it's not about me per se, it's the work that's being done and how I can contribute to that work that really defines it. So I guess in a nutshell, step out of the spotlight and let other people take the stage and just smile to know that you're making an impact in a world of influencers. You can make an impact.
Love it. Thank you, Erik.
Well, Erik, and good for you and good for your father. You're making me think of Harry Truman's famous statement, you can get a heck of a lot done if you don't care who gets the credit.
Correct.
And I think that's part of the humility that anybody as an outsider needs to bring to a school system. Let the teachers take the credit. Let the parents take the credit. Let people who are on the ground take the credit. It's not the outside expert who does that. One of the most powerful things we've done is what we call the science fair, where teachers display what they've done and they will cheer for each other and they will yell for each other. That's the sort of thing that really matters, not the outside expertise. In terms of the prompt that you offered, I would tell you that one of the things that I've had to learn is what I would call the irregular pace of change. I used to think that a little bit more change would lead to a little bit better implementation, and I was just dead wrong about that. What I've learned in the study of more than 30 both academic and behavioral programs is that you go from level 1 to level 2, nothing happens. Level 2 to level 3, nothing happens. Level 3 to level 4, improvement is off the roof. But very, very few school systems get to level 4 because they get so frustrated. Well, level 1, 2, 3 will shoot. That didn't work. Let's buy another program. 1, 2, 3, let's buy another program. And they're in this endless merry-go-round. So what I've learned is the value of persistence over time. And I try to tell our clients that right up front that we're not going steady. We're getting married. We want you with us for the long term, because it's going to take time to get these things done.
Love it. Thank you, everybody, for your reflections. And this has been a great episode. We had Truman mentioned, we had John Hattie, Batman Begins, marriage proposals. We got a little bit of everything here tonight. So thank you again, Dr. Reeves. You may have noticed, I saw Erik. I was certainly taking notes on a lot of things that you were saying to help inform my work. So I want to thank you so much for being here and joining us tonight. Thank you also to my co-hosts today, Erik Francis and Larry Ainsworth, for being a part of this special episode of The Community Connection. And